Yes, Saturday mornings. A bygone pastime that helped create many people's most cherished and fondest childhood memories. Long before the rise of 24-hour animation cable channels and streaming services, the only times one could watch cartoons on television were during the weekday afternoons and, of course, on Saturday mornings, with the only exceptions being any animated primetime specials and the occasional experiment in making animated shows for adults. There would also be plenty of dedicated blocks, from the Disney Afternoon, Fox Kids, and Kids WB. However, out of the many animated blocks created, there is one special Saturday morning block in particular, along with its sister weekday block, that were made during the late 90s that holds a special place in many hearts, including yours truly. And that was Disney's One Saturday Morning, and its weekday counterpart, 1-2. Over the span of 5 years and 4 years respectively, they spawned some of the most memorable animated shows to ever air on ABC Saturday morning and weekday afternoons. But just how were these two conceived? What went into their development? And why did they end after only a few years? Well, all of that and more we'll be uncovering in this video. I'm the MediaNutso, and it's time for us to pay a revisit to Disney's One Saturday Morning and 1-2.
Monday morning, wake up time, get to work and stand in line. Work big, but feel real fine. Saturday morning. Coming up next is Tuesday's grind. The week is young, but I'm out of my mind. Work big, but feel real fine. Saturday morning. Lots of things about Saturday, wish I had the other days. Things got me and found a way. One.
As well as more.
Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Friday.
Now, before we dive into the history of these two blocks, let's first set the stage for what led up to the block's development. Our story begins back in 1990, when the Children's Television Act was first signed into law. Yes, this is actually relevant to this story. Anyways, for those that don't know, or if you live outside the US, the short version is this act came about because during the past decade, parents and advocacy groups, particularly Action for Children's Television, were continuously criticizing the large amount of cartoons based on toy lines for lacking any real educational value and for being seen as just glorified toy commercials. Thus, when the act came into effect in 1991, the F.C.C. started implementing regulations that required stations and cable networks to air a certain amount of educational content, as well as limit commercial airtime, and it specifically forbade them from playing ads that were tied into whatever show was on during the respective airings. There was just one big problem with those initial regulations. They were pretty ineffective. The stations and networks failed to keep any of the required records, and the act didn't exactly provide a clear and strong definition of what qualified as being educational and informational. Therefore, if a network or station wanted to air, say, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they could say they're educational because certain episodes tackle specific social and/or moral issues, even though it was very clear those shows weren't made to be educational in the slightest. Now, they did try to respond by putting in short PSA tags at the end of each episode, but that unfortunately wasn't good enough. So, in August of 1996, the F.C.C. adopted the Children's Programming Report and Order, which did two things. It gave a much better and clearer definition of what qualified to be an educational program, and it also mandated that by September of 1997, all networks had to air at least 3 hours of educational programming a week. And since Saturday mornings were the only time of the week the big networks were willing to provide children's programming, it ultimately made it the default slot. Okay, now that we've got all of that laid down, let's really take a deep dive into the meat of this story. Just a few months earlier, on February 9th, the Walt Disney Company had finalized its purchase of the ABC television network from their then parent company, Capital Cities ABC Incorporated. Following afterwards, then Disney CEO Michael Eisner ordered the network to completely overhaul their entire Saturday morning block. He also wanted the new block to stand out from the others and have it fully comply within the new regulations. Now all that was needed was the right person who could bring this vision of a block to life. Enter animation writer and producer Peter Hastings. At the time, Hastings was well known as the producer and one of the main writers on Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. However, by this point in time, Hastings had grown quite frustrated with Kids WB executives wanting to make changes and additions to Pinky and the Brain, and after the show's third season, he resigned from Warner Brothers and went over to Disney. When Hastings first came on board, he was tasked with, as already mentioned, revamping ABC's Saturday morning lineup. So Hastings pitched them an idea based around the concept that Saturday was different from every other day of the week. And this would be perfectly represented in the intro, with the industrial factory buildings representing the weekdays and the playground park seen at the beginning possibly representing Sunday. He also suggested that they utilize virtual set technology, of which he didn't know much about at the time, and the technology was just starting to be developed. But Disney and ABC loved his idea, so they decided to proceed forward with Hastings' plan. From there, they hired Prudence Fenton to serve as both the consultant manager and a co-executive producer. They then attended the 1997 NAB show, where they sampled various virtual set technologies, and would ultimately select the tech developed by ACOM and LSET. To help produce the virtual sets, the production company Rutherford Bench Productions hired Pacific Ocean Post to do the job. The initial drawing of the main building that Hastings designed was basically Grand Central Station with a big roller coaster, but this would morph into a towering mechanical structure. However, it would retain some similarities, including having a central high-raised room with an east, south, and west wing. Also, to signify that the shows and segments were enlightening, they added a little light bulb icon with the voice saying,
"Illuminating television."
They even went through the effort of animating a different hand switching the bulb on. Now that's dedication. Originally, the block was scheduled to premiere on September 6th, as can be seen in some early promos.
Disney's One Saturday Morning, starting September 6th on ABC.
But due to the extensive coverage of the funeral of Princess Diana of Wales, it got pushed back by 1 week to September 13, 1997. Now, before we start talking about the block itself, there's one more key player involved in the block's development that doesn't often get mentioned. That person was Geraldine Jerry Laybourne, probably best known as the former head of Nickelodeon, as well as helping build it into the kids network it became during the 80s to the mid-90s. She was brought on board to manage the block and help develop some of the shows. So now that we've got all that laid out, it's finally time to head inside and see what this block had to offer. One Saturday Morning was broken up into 2 sections, 3 hours worth of regular animated programming and a 2-hour sub-block, the titular One Saturday Morning, consisting of 3 shows that were given 40-minute time slots, with the extra 10 minutes consisting of host and educational segments, comedy sketches, and the virtual world envisioned by Peter Hastings. First up, we have the inaugural flagship shows, and the very first one was Doug, which had premiered the season before. Now, we all remember Doug as one of the original 3 Nicktoons, so just how did Disney get a hold of it? Well, to elaborate, when the show premiered alongside Rugrats and the Ren and Stimpy show on August 11th, 1991, it did pretty good. It wasn't a huge hit at the level of Ren and Stimpy or later Rugrats, which is made more ironic as the network executives had hoped Doug would be their breakout hit, but it did well enough to run for 4 seasons on the network. However, that's when they hit a snag. By the time season 4 ended, Nick hadn't picked up the show for a 5th season, which would have pushed the episode count to 65. See, one of the deals made for the original Nicktoons was a promise that each show would get 65 episodes, which would span across 5 13-episode seasons. But if Nick didn't deliver on that, then the rights would revert back to the original creators and they could take their shows elsewhere. So creator Jim Jenkins and his partner co-executive producer David Campbell continuously pressured Nick to renew the show for that 5th season, to which Nick had 2 years to change their decision. And when it didn't happen, you guessed it, all the rights reverted back to Jenkins and his production company Jumbo Pictures. But during that time frame, other networks started expressing interest in picking up the show, and ABC was one of the networks interested in picking it up, which Jenkins and Campbell did inform Nick of in the hopes of speeding up their decision. At the same time, after Disney fully acquired ABC, they had caught wind of how much of a hot property Doug was fast becoming. So naturally, they wanted in on it, right? Oh ho, Disney did want in alright, but they got more than just that. They didn't just acquire the show, but also the entirety of Jumbo Pictures, and with it all of the show's rights, including its trademark and the rights for future merchandising. They even made Jenkins and Campbell Disney executives. On the flip side though, thanks to a special condition, Nick was allowed to retain the rights to the episodes produced during their tenure, so that's how Doug became a Disney property. Anywho, as far as the main show itself, it was meant as a direct continuation, picking up where it left off at the end of the 4th season, following more of the daily life of Doug Funny and his friends in the town of Bluffington. While this run did pick up where the Nick run ended, the show did go through some changes. The episodes were now a full 22 minutes instead of 2 11-minute segments, the recording was moved from New York to Los Angeles, and due to not settling on a decent deal, Billy West didn't return to reprise Doug and Roger, so they were recast to Tom McHugh and Chris Phillips respectively. When the show premiered on ABC on Saturday, September 7th, 1996 as brand spanking new Doug, yes, that's what it was first called, but it was later changed to just Disney's Doug, audience and fan reaction was pretty mixed. Many weren't big fans of the changes made to the show, and even some of the cast and crew members felt that the show wasn't the same. However, those that gave it a fair chance felt that it was good in its own right, and that it worked as a continuation. But regardless of what people thought of this run, there was no denying that it was a huge hit. In fact, for about a year, it was ABC's highest rated Saturday morning show. Naturally, with that kind of success, it was brought over to one Saturday morning and became one of the block's flagship shows. Next up, we have Pepper Ann. Created by Sue Rose and based on a comic strip series she had done for Young and Modern magazine, the series centered on Pepper Ann Pearson and all of the crazy and wacky shenanigans she and her friends and family go through on a daily basis in the town of Hazelnut. Fun fact, Pepper Ann was originally pitched to Nickelodeon to be the next potential Nicktoon, but they ultimately passed on it. However, snippets of the pilot can be seen in a couple of early promos. The show was particularly notable as being the very first Disney animated series to be created by a woman, and it wouldn't be for another 18 years that Disney would get another in-house show created by a woman. Another important person involved with Pepper Ann's production was Tom Warburton, better known as Mr. Warburton, who served as the lead character designer. One other tidbit, it was Michael Eisner that pushed to have a show starring a girl as a part of the block. Say whatever you may about some of the man's business decisions, but when he got one right, he got it right. Last but definitely not least, we've got Recess. Created by Paul Germain and Joan Salabert, the show focused on 6 4th graders, TJ, Vince, Gus, Mikey, Gretchen, and Spinelli attending 3rd Street School and how they tackle various conflicts that occurred during recess and in or out of class. Of the 3 flagship shows, this one became the block's big breakout hit, unseating Doug to become its highest rated show. It would go on long after it stopped producing new episodes in 2001, and even later when the block got overhauled. Just goes to show how much of an enduring success Recess was. All 3 series went on to last for 65 episodes, which was the standard for most Disney animated series at the time. Funny enough, even though one verse in the theme song says, "5 hours of summer, once a week, one Saturday morning." The 3 shows have their characters attending school. Just a rather funny and ironic juxtaposition, though it did make sense for recess. The other new additions to the block that first year were 101 Dalmatians the series, based on the 1961 animated film, and also premiered a year after the 1996 live-action remake, and one of the only non-Disney produced shows, Science Court. Created by Tom Snyder and animated in his signature Squiggle Vision style, it taught various science topics through a mix of courtroom drama, humor, and various science experiments. There were also a few shows that were carried over from the previous lineup. Alongside Doug, there was The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which had long ended production in 1991, but continued to do well on the network, and also helped further fulfill the EI requirements. Jungle Cubs, a spin-off that somewhat acted as a prequel to The Jungle Book. Schoolhouse Rock, which had been an ABC Saturday morning staple since 1973, and finally, there's the Bugs Bunny and Tweety Show. Now, the only reason this show made it over was because of contractual commitments ABC had made when they acquired the rights to the show from CBS in 1985. It at first remained at a full hour, which it had been since its 3rd season in 1988, but then was trimmed down to a half hour during its final year on the block.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show.
Oh, but One Saturday Morning had much more to offer than just the shows. There were also the host segments and the interstitials. For the former, they were hosted by Charlie, played by Jessica Brunel for the first season.
Did you hurt yourself?
Yeah, I cut myself shaving.
Shaving. You shave your forehead.
Yeah, don't you?
No, I don't shave my forehead. I don't have hair on my forehead, and neither do you.
Because I shave it.
Okay, please stop.
Okay, listen. Okay, I'll go 3 days without shaving my forehead, and you'll see what happens.
But was then replaced by Mimi, played by Valerie Mae Miller, and her elephant sidekick, Jelly Roll, voiced by Brad Garrett for the 2nd and 3rd season.
Hey, Jelly Roll, what you doing?
Hi, Mimi. I'm feeding my pet.
Fertilizer? You're feeding your pet fertilizer?
Of course. It's a petunia. I just planted the seeds this morning.
And you know what I have to say about that.
As for the latter, they comprised of Great Minds Think for Themselves, featuring the Genie, voiced by Robin Williams, presenting various facts about certain historical figures and inventors.
Albert didn't even speak till the age of 3.
See, Papa?
What is Imke? In school, his brilliant mind was always racing.
It's Einstein's mind teaching itself Euclidean geometry by the age of 12.
He became the most influential and famous scientist in the world.
Mrs. Munger's Class, basically a series of conversations between the titular teacher and her students presented via yearbook photos animated in Photoshop and After Effects.
Simmer. Class, I hope you are all prepared to give your oral reports today.
I would be proud to present my report, Mrs. Munger.
Well, terrific, Dawn.
By the way, the skits would get Disney into some legal trouble, as 4 former students and the teacher filed a lawsuit for using their photos without permission or clearing their personality rights. Fortunately, the lawsuit was settled for an undisclosed amount. Later, the series was succeeded by Centerville, which was essentially a similar thing, but it takes place in the titular town of Centerville instead of inside a yearbook, and is done to the tune of a drum beat.
I think I'm getting car sick. Now that I believe.
Suspension needs a workout, or it goes stale, like bread.
What's the diff? Where you, well, spot the difference between the 2 pictures.
What's the diff?
Round 1.
Hey, can you find the 6 differences between this picture and this one? Yeah, sure, they look the same, but they're not. 6 things are different about them. We're going to come back 2 more times to see if you can find out what's the diff. Then stick around for the answers later on right here inside Disney's One Saturday Morning.
How Things Work, a parody of comic books and 1950s educational films, where a man, Mr. Works, voiced by Corey Burton, gives a very nonsensical explanation of how certain things work.
You say motors and blades. I say futuristic supercomputer capable of communicating with metal. Inside every can opener, 13 tiny Nobel laureates operate analytical engines powerful enough to launch a rocket ship to Mars.
Manny the Uncanny, starring Paul Rudd, exploring various subjects.
Here's Mr. Charles Glass. Hello, Charles. How you doing? I'm pretty good. Now, Charles is going to teach me to be fit. Build up my chest so I'll be able to float or something. Right. Okay.
The Tube Dwellers, showing the many adventures of two workers both named Bob working inside a TV set.
All right, give me another one.
All right, 6 letters, appalling or shocking?
Anything ugly. Anything ugly. Is that 6 letters?
Ugly. Hey, yeah, you know what? That kind of fits.
Oh, it does?
If you cut a couple of the letters off, but if you sort of smooch it in there, it all fits in there.
Sometimes I put 2 letters in one box. I'm hot.
How much stuff could an elephant crush? Where Jelly Roll, well, does exactly what the title says.
So, what are you gonna crush today, Jelly Roll?
A super deluxe roast turkey dinner.
And find out why. Starring Timon and Pumbaa, where Pumbaa asks a question, Timon gives a very outlandish answer to said question, and then the former explains how the subject matter really works.
Hey, look at all these holes. You should get your money back. Wait, Timon. I think these holes are supposed to be here. When you put a CD in the player, it starts spinning real fast. Then a laser shines onto it. Whoa! Hey, watch it! Whenever the laser hits the flat part of the disc, the beam is reflected back to a photo detector. A what? A doohickey that can sense light. Why didn't you say so?
Within a few weeks of its premiere, One Saturday Morning came out of the gate strong, as it was immediately a huge hit. And for about 2 years, it was beating Fox Kids and Kids WB in the ratings. But those two were able to put up a good battle, as the former had Power Rangers, and the latter had Batman Beyond, the new Batman Superman Adventures, and Men in Black the series. So naturally, with how successful the block was, Disney was quick to capitalize on it, with soundtrack albums, toys, activity books, and even some comics based on specific episodes. Midway through the block's first season, in January of 1998, Disney was in talks with UPN to program a 2-hour block for the network that would air on weekdays and Sunday mornings, which was relatively easy to initiate as the head of UPN at the time, Dean Valentine, was a former Disney executive, since by this time, UPN's own kids block, UPN Kids, hadn't been doing all that well. However, these talks were called off after just 1 week due to Disney and UPN disputing over how the block should be branded and the amount of EI programming Disney was going to provide. Afterwards, UPN started discussions with Nickelodeon to produce the block, but that also fell through. Then they entered an agreement with Saban Entertainment, and that didn't go anywhere either. Finally, in March, Disney and UPN resumed discussions and ultimately made an agreement for Disney to produce a 2-hour block for weekdays and Sunday mornings, which would act as the companion to One Saturday Morning, and it was to be called Whacktastic. But for the sake of having a greater brand identity, plus it sounding like a pseudo swear word, it was changed in July of 1999, 2 months before it debuted. And so, on September 6, 1999, gone was UPN Kids, and in came Disney's 1-2.
Lots of things about Saturday, wish I had the other days. Things got me and found a way, one.
As well as 4.
Monday, Tuesday, Friday.
While it mainly showcased many of the shows from One Saturday Morning, the one major difference between them is that instead of having host segments, 1-2 would showcase short gag segments based around Doug, Pepper Ann, Recess, and Sabrina the Animated Series. It also utilized a futuristic city for its bumpers, which was styled to match the look of the main One Saturday Morning building. Also, for a brief period of time, new episodes of some shows like Recess and Pepper Ann would premiere on both blocks, so one would get new episodes across the whole week. Alright, back on over to One Saturday Morning. Like many blocks, over time, the lineup went through various changes. For the 1998 and 99 season, Jungle Cubs concluded its 2-season run on September 7th and was replaced by Hercules the Animated Series the following week, which had also premiered in syndication. But its time on the block would be short-lived as it ended its run on April 24th, 1999. And on May 1st, to coincide with Mickey Mouse's 70th anniversary, they came out with the anthology series Mickey Mouse Works, which sought to revive the classic cartoons format and was also historically significant to be the first Disney animated series to be produced in widescreen. Next, their run of Doug would conclude on June 26th, but it would continue to play in reruns up through September 8, 2001, and Science Court, in an attempt to make it more widely appealing, was renamed Squigglevision, and introduced new opening segments hosted by two new characters, Fizz and Martina, who were first introduced in a series of educational games, Fizz and Martina's Math Adventures.
Fizz, how do you think Butcher gets out of that collar by himself?
Yeah, and after he gets loose, why does he ever come back?
Good question. Fizz, look, who is that person going up to Butcher?
Fizz, think. It means constant in effort or working hard and steady.
8 letters and begins with a D. Doorknob?
No.
Delicious?
No.
For the 1999 and 2000 season, 101 Dalmatians the series would conclude on September 4th, and the following week on the 11th, it was replaced by Sabrina the Animated Series, which had premiered on 1/2 5 days earlier on the 6th. Produced by DIC Animation, it acted as a sort of spin-off to the live-action Sabrina the Teenage Witch. An interesting story about its addition is that prior to Disney's purchase of ABC, their then parent company, Capital Cities ABC Inc., made a joint venture with DiC where they would have 95% of the majority stake, while DiC's co-founder Andy Hayward retained the other 5%. Thus, after Disney bought ABC, they had also acquired their stake in DiC. So for a short time, DiC became a Disney subsidiary. But even with that, they did treat Sabrina like it was one of their own. Anyways, the other new show added that season was The Weekenders on February 26, 2000. As already mentioned earlier, the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show was trimmed down to a half hour and would end its long network run on September 2nd, which was really no big loss as they were playing on Cartoon Network and Boomerang at this point. Lastly, both Squigglevision and Schoolhouse Rock would conclude their runs around the same time. On 1/2's end, both Doug and Hercules the Animated Series would leave the block in late 2000. Now, it was around this point in time where the two blocks began to struggle. Just to be clear, the issue wasn't that the new shows premiering were terrible, quite the contrary. The problem was that they weren't pulling in the ratings and viewers their predecessors did, and it can be attributed to one big factor: increasing competition. Around this time, Kids WB really started to ramp up its lineup with some heavy hitters, including Jackie Chan Adventures, Static Shock, and especially Pokemon, which I don't even need to say how phenomenally huge and popular that show was. But needless to say, it was a huge blow to One Saturday Morning and 1/2. Not to mention, Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon also had their own heavy hitters as well, with the Cartoons and the newest batch of Nicktoons respectively. Now, this isn't to say that One Saturday Morning and 1/2 didn't have any victories after that. Probably the biggest one they scored was when the Weekenders briefly dethroned Pokemon as the #1 rated Saturday morning show in May of 2000, after the latter held the spot for 54 weeks. This was such a big deal that the Weekenders was being dubbed the show that killed Pokemon. Granted, like I just said, it was brief, but it was still pretty significant. And while Fox Kids managed to hold on with Power Rangers and did get another big hit with Digimon, it wasn't enough to help the block surpass One Saturday Morning. Anyways, for the 2000 and 2001 season, it was sort of a transitionary period. At the start of the season, it introduced a new opening with the shorter rendition of the theme song,
Friday has an exit sign, but getting there still takes some time. What would make me feel real fun? Saturday morning.
And a set of new bumpers showing kids playing outside on a playground or an open field, with the animated characters from the shows presented using stock footage, and the Anthropomorphic 1 building was changed into just an Anthropomorphic number 1. But it still retained the subblock and many of the sketches and interstitials. However, by January of 2001, that's when even bigger changes came in, and not for the better, as the 2-hour subblock was discontinued altogether, along with all of the host segments and interstitials, with the exception of What's That Sound, which for whatever reason stuck around until the 2002 overhaul. As for the shows, some new ones made their premiere. Teacher's Pet on September 9th, Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, which had joined 1-2 on October 2nd, premiered 12 days later on October 14th, Lloyd in Space, which was created by the same team that did Recess on February 3rd, 2001, and to coincide with Walt Disney's 100th birthday, Mickey Mouse Works was revamped into House of Mouse on January 13th, which reran almost every Mouseworks short plus 2 new ones, but now had wraparound segments where Mickey and the gang run a nightclub featuring every character the studio made up until that point, and predictably, chaos ensues. Also, Pepper Ann would leave the block on January 27, 2001. As for 1-2, it also did away with all its segments and virtual sets. In their place were just various commercial bumpers for each of the shows. It also stopped being referred to by name on air, though it did continue to be mentioned in a few local commercials.
Flip us on your TV set. Lots of laughs is a sure bet. Buzz and Free and Tarzan 2. More TV 29 and Disney's 1-2.
Also, Pepper Ann would leave 1-2 in 2001 following the end of its 5th and final season. For the 2001 and 2002 season, Recess would end production but continued to play in reruns on both blocks due to it still being quite popular. Doug and Buzz Lightyear of Star Command would leave one Saturday morning on September 8th, then Sabrina the Animated Series followed suit on October 13th, and backing up a bit to September 15th, they introduced a 1-hour subblock called the Zoog Hour, where they showcased 2 of the Disney Channel's then most popular shows, Even Stevens and Lizzie McGuire. However, those weren't the only new additions. They also premiered Mary-Kate and Ashley in Action on October 20th, which only lasted 1 season due to low ratings, but it was also notable as it was the last new non-Disney animated series to premiere on the block. Lastly, The Weekenders would end its network run on January 12th and would be replaced by Timo Supremo the next week on the 19th. As for 1-2, it would premiere one new show that would never air on one Saturday morning, The Legend of Tarzan on September 3rd, 2001, which was a follow-up continuation of the 1999 animated film, as well as the 3rd season of The Weekenders on September 9th, which would last until December 2nd when it left the block for good. By the end of the season, around the time Disney had finalized their purchase of the Fox Family Worldwide company, and after taking notice of the strong performance of the Zoog Hour, it was decided to completely overhaul the block to have it be a bigger mix of reruns of Disney Channel shows and some original ones. And so, on September 7th, 2002, One Saturday Morning aired for the very last time and will be relaunched as ABC Kids the following week. By the way, the silliest part about the relaunch was that ABC had gone ahead and renewed all of the shows before the relaunch took effect. So Disney would go on to air the new episodes on Disney Channel and Toon Disney, though Timo Supremo got lucky and aired some of Season 2 on ABC Kids before it was taken off for good. On the other end, 1-2 continued on for one more season, but by then, the name had been dropped altogether and was never given an official on-air rebrand, though Disney's official website did refer to it as the very generic sounding Disney's animation weekdays. The only change to the schedule made was Sabrina the Animated Series leaving and being replaced by the newest season of Digimon, Digimon Frontier, which was also airing on ABC Family in September. On a side note, by the season's end, when it got to the point where they couldn't air new episodes every weekday, they started rerunning Digimon Tamers to fill in the remaining slots. From there though, the block limped along until it officially ended on August 31st, 2003. While it was unfortunate that the two blocks ended where they did, it was probably for the best. Yes, it would have been nice to see them go on for a bit longer, and the lineup of shows they had going were good, but it was evident that by 2002, both blocks lost a lot of the spark that made them enticing to watch and just couldn't keep up with the competition. That being said though, both blocks did a great job at standing out from the others at the time and helped usher in another batch of memorable Disney animated shows. All in all, Disney's One Saturday Morning and One 2 were creative and imaginative blocks, with some great and entertaining shows, fun skits and segments, and did a fairly good job at being educational for the time. Even though their lifespans were relatively short, they certainly left their impact on many people's childhoods and were good examples of having the right balance of education and entertainment. I hope you all enjoyed this video and that it gave you a great and fun nostalgic insight into the history behind the two blocks. And if you'd like to see more, please leave a like on this video as well as subscribe to my channel, and be sure to comment your thoughts down below. What were some of your favorite shows and sketches from each block? Until next time, this is MediaNutso saying thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.
Monday morning, wake up time, get to work and stand in line. What would make me feel real fine? Saturday morning. Coming up next is Tuesday's grind. The week is young, but I'm out of my mind. What would make me feel real fine? Saturday morning. Lots of things about Saturday, wish I had the other days. Think I may have found a way one.
As well as more.
Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday. Wednesday, Thursday, jammed in the middle. Once again, make the pose a riddle. Watch strung wheel loose, but plays like a fiddle. One Saturday morning.